Hey team, welcome back to The Pillars, the podcast of the 363rd ISR Wing. I'm Dr. Reed in the studio today with Tech Sergeant Joe.
Hi everybody.
And Dr. Jerry.
Hey guys.
Hey, and today we're talking about transitions or making first impressions. How do you do that well? And I think you'd have to probably have your head buried in the sand over the last couple of weeks not to recognize that there's a lot of transition going on across our wing. We've got a lot of change of commands that have been happening. We have personally attended several of them. But in addition to the changes that are happening in our formal leadership, we're in the midst of PCS season. So a lot of people coming and going, and that means a lot of turnover in positions. And some people are taking on new roles and responsibilities associated with those changes. And so that's kind of what we're in the studio today to talk about is how do you make these transitions successfully? How do you step into a new role, put your best foot forward, and make a good impression?
Yeah, and if you haven't heard, we unfortunately are losing our very own Dr. Jerry. So he's going through his own version of a transition. Yeah.
Right.
So what's been going for you in this transition?
Well, I'm trying to think about it just like, during my active duty days, just like it's another version of a PCS, right? So, if you've been in the military for any period of time, you've already been through a major transition when you joined.
True.
And you'll go through inevitably another one when you get out. So, and then all in between, we've got PCSs or PCAs, extended TDYs or deployments. So, myriad of different transitions that we have to learn how to navigate. And so because I know that I've got historically this experience with it, I'm trying to think about it in a similar manner. But being cognizant of the fact that there's so many different things or different parts of me that are having to make this transition. So we're not just moving to a new place, but I'm also taking on a new job with a new role. I'm, having to develop a whole new routine in terms of, my day-to-day, how and when I get up in the morning, how I prep, my commute, having to, visualize all that right now because I've been doing the same type of thing for just about the past 6 years. I think probably my biggest anxiety, I know you didn't ask this, but it's kind of on my mind. My biggest anxiety is that for the first time in a long, long time, I won't be working with exclusively military folks. I accepted a pretty nice leadership position at a large hospital system in Nebraska, and these folks have met me but once when I interviewed, and they don't have any kind of history with me, nor I with them. I'm not showing up with any kind of rank on my collar or any kind of like bona fide credentials. Well, obviously I've got my professional credentials, but nothing that they can, look at me and say, oh, okay, this guy's got experience or knowledge or, some kind of authority. So I have to essentially start from scratch and build up that kind of rapport. I think that I'm probably, most anxious about that just because I've benefited from that. Both within the military and within our organization, just, having gotten to know people and people getting to know me. And, now I've got to start off making brand new first impressions.
So I like that. I mean, you're talking about, on one hand, this isn't your first rodeo.
Right.
You've certainly been through a lot of transition in the past, and you're able to reflect on your experience, what you've done well through those transitions, and you carry that forward as you're going into this new job. And you're respectful of the fact that this is a wholly new enterprise that you're going into.
Right.
You're not coming in with a whole lot of maybe gusto, basically saying, hey, I know what to do here, like step aside everyone. And there is no obvious markers you were talking about. There's no obvious markers. People can't size you up with some of the, the traditional markers that we use in the military to identify a person's, their pedigree, their history, what they've done before. They may not know what kind of expectations they can have of you as a new leader in their organization.
And we try to guess that from people's bios. So especially with leadership, a lot of times their official bios will be circulated and we'll get to see, this person has this education, they went to this school in residence, they have these assignments. So try to get a kind of a gauge for who they are and what they're bringing to the table. I think the part of the challenge with me that everybody listening to this either has faced or will face is at some point you're going to make that military to civilian transition. Even if you're already a civilian and you're working for the military, if you choose to go work for a non-government, non-federal organization, they're going to look at your resume, your bio, if you will, and say, I don't know what any of this means. We don't know how to size this person up.
Right.
And so you're kind of putting yourself in proving ground territory where, right off the bat, you're going to be evaluated by those first initial impressions that you make.
Right, and here's a plug, I guess, for TAPS, or the TAP class that you go
definitely.
through, is helping folks to translate their military experience into something that civilian employers can more easily understand. So maybe you were a flight leader or a squadron commander, but what does that mean? What size of organization are we talking about? What were your roles and responsibilities?
Yeah, I definitely think that when you're in that transition phase, humility can help a little bit along the way, right? And then kind of managing the expectations, understanding that maybe not everybody speaks the same lingo as we normally speak in the military.
That's a great point.
You talked a little bit about some of your anxieties going into this new position, but I also want to find out what you're excited about. Okay. What are you excited about in this new role that you're going to?
Well, there's the cliche about a fresh start, but in this case, I think it's apropos for my family and I, and what we're looking at. I mean, we're starting everything afresh, and so it gives us a chance to really decide what we want our lifestyle to be like, and because we'll be near family, it's gonna. I mean, our lifestyle is gonna change just because of that. I mean, just naturally, we're probably going to be spending a lot more time with extended family members, and I'm actually really looking forward to that, and have my kid grow up with his cousins and everything.
So I think that's something that probably resonates with a lot of people. A PCS or a new leadership opportunity brings the opportunity for a fresh start, a new look at things, a new opportunity to develop skills, and it may be, if luck has it your way in the military, you might get closer to family. It might bring those kinds of opportunities. What else are you looking forward to in this new role?
I think the opportunity to build on some leadership skills and some other skill sets that maybe I just have not had the opportunity to do before. And so whether you're in a quote unquote leadership position or not, whenever you PCS, you make that transition, there's always going to be opportunities to improve yourself professionally or personally. And so I don't know exactly what those opportunities are going to be yet, but I'm excited to seek them out and try to navigate that. But Sergeant Ackenberg, I really like what you said about humility, because I recognize that while I may have it's been recognized, otherwise I wouldn't have had gotten this job opportunity, that I possess some transferable skills for this job. I don't know exactly what it requires yet, and so even for our folks who are PCSing, they may see a job title and be like, oh yeah, I can do that. I can be NCOIC of this or flight chief of this. You don't know exactly what all that's going to entail until you get to that unit.
Yeah, I think it's really important to be willing to admit that you don't know everything, and just because you're a leader doesn't mean that you have all the answers. And so when you don't know something, speak up, say so, make it a point to inquire, to study, and to learn, and to admit where you might be falling short in your knowledge of operations or whatever the case may be.
Absolutely. And I think people appreciate, by and large, a genuine leader who's willing to speak candidly about their flaws or about their knowledge gaps, whatever they may be, more so than somebody who just tries to have all the answers or tries to put themselves out there like they're the end-all be-all.
So I'm glad that you brought up flaws, leadership flaws. So you've had enough experience, I think, at this point to have developed some insights, or at least I hope so. What flaws have you had to kind of work on? And you knew you were going to be on the hot seat here as we started this interview.
Okay, we're going there.
What flaws, if you're willing to kind of be vulnerable with our listening audience, have you had to work on through successive leadership roles?
Oh man, I'd say probably pride is the biggest one, and first thing that comes to mind. I have really had to, I think, struggle with being more humble And I know that's weird to say, but again, that's why I like that Sergeant Ackenberg brought it up, because I think that's so important for a leader and for gaining the trust of the people whom you're trying to lead. If you guys remember, a while back I did a series of 5 Minutes to Thrive on Lieutenant General Quast's 5 or 4 major hallmarks of leadership. First one was nobility. I think I overdid that one. And so I've been trying to remind myself to work more on the second one, which was humility.
Yeah.
And then courage and compassion rounded out the 4. And so, that's something that I've really been trying to work on.
I appreciate you bringing that up and, being willing to be vulnerable in that way, because I imagine that that's something that a lot of people struggle with as they come into a new role. If anything, their anxiety about being new and feeling incompetent might drive them to overcompensate, right?
Absolutely.
And to come across as trying to be very effective or very knowledgeable, when really and realistically their experience doesn't sort of connote that they should have that much, that they should be speaking that authoritatively or that pridefully on any kind of subject.
Well, and what I know from a lot of my PCSs, especially in leadership positions, is that when you're coming into a new leadership position, there's such a hunger from, prior leadership, the airmen, for you to come in and solve all the old problems, right? They're really looking for that new blood, and sometimes there is the expectation that you need to have all the answers. And so I think coming in with the idea of listening to learn, right? Growing with the airmen, understanding what the gaps are, but not quick to make decisions, right? Really get to understand how this new job works, how your new position flows, and then start making small changes. But there is, I know from experience, this overwhelming urge for you to come in and just like make action, make change.
And to be that savior, to be able to say yes and to gain that immediate rapport with other folks. But, I had a really awesome squadron commander a few years ago who gave me 2 pieces of advice. She said, when you come into an organization, don't change anything for at least the first month, more if you can, because you want to see what the status quo is and how things are already operating. It may just be perfectly fine. You may not need to really make any big changes. So learn the system first, learn the whys behind the processes before you do anything. And the second piece of advice she gave me was, the people the first 3 people who barge in your door and ask for permission to do something, tell them no. Because they've probably been hearing no for years, and they're just waiting for some new person to come in who doesn't know the background or the history and will just jump at a good idea. So don't be that yes person right away.
There's probably some wisdom there. All right, Joe, I want to point the truth ray at you for a second. Sure. You talked about your experiences as a leader a little bit. What pitfalls or what mistakes maybe have you had to learn from as a leader?
So many. I have been called compassionate, enthusiastic, right?
Wait, those sound like good things.
Yeah, well, you would think, but then the way that they sometimes are used, it's almost as like you're too enthusiastic, you're too passionate.
So you did that interview thing where you describe your greatest weakness as a strength.
Yeah, right.
Clever.
But what I've learned is that I've had to take a step back. Like, I am quick to action. So if I see wrong, I want to correct it. I want to fight for the airmen. But I've learned, too, that you can get yourself in trouble that way. I remember specifically an airman came to me one time and told me this horrific story of his experience with a supervisor. And I just locked arms with this member, and we went straight to the first sergeant. And the first sergeant was like, "Thank you, Sergeant Joe," but had the member stand outside the door, and then she proceeded to tell me the real story. And so it was a good lesson that, it's okay to be the lending ear, and it's okay to be action, but let's take more into consideration, right?
Yeah.
Get a whole picture versus just that snippet from that airman. And that was really helpful for me, because in the future, I've had situations come to me, and I've been able to gather more data, get a little more insight into the situation before action had to be taken. And I think that benefited everybody a little better than just locking arms and creating, And
I think we feel under pressure sometimes when we're in these major transition periods to jump right to action.
Yeah.
But I think we can alleviate a lot of our own discomfort once we are settled into a new place and or a new job, if we just kind of sit back for a little bit and allow ourselves to get settled and to just understand the status quo before we try to take any more on.
We say that, and we're all sitting here around the table nodding and kind of resonating with that idea of just kind of take a moment to breathe. When you think of that OODA loop, that kind of observing and orienting, looking around, that's such an important. I'm sorry. It's a part of my training.
Right. I just like to say it.
But I think we all understand that that's an important part of the process, and yet, in spite of that, there seems to be something that compels us to want to jump into the deep end, probably before we've looked around to see that there aren't sharks or other hazards in the water. So I just throw that out there because I think a lot of us come into these positions and we know that's probably what's best, but we just start thrashing and flailing and doing stuff to be seen as productive or helpful or to make a good impression.
Some of it is self-inflicted. So some of it is, you feel like you have to justify yourself in this new position, or start to make your mark early on, so you can establish that authority with these people who don't know you from Adam.
Right.
But the other part of it too, I think, is Air Force culture. I mean, just the way that our promotion system works, our EPRs and OPRs, at least as they're currently threaded, you've got to make some kind of impact. You've got to have some kind of quantifiable outcome that's positive over your year span or less of rating time. And so sometimes when you get into this new job, you've only got a few months left before that EPR OPR closes out. And so you've got to start doing things right away, or you feel like you've got to start doing those things.
Yeah, I can relate with that completely. When I got selected for this assignment, I'm the first in this position, right? And there's kind of an idea of what we do, but I know clinic work, and I show productivity because we have numbers and we have all kinds of data at the clinic to show that we're rocking it. But here, how do you quantify and have data for just doing unit visitations and walkarounds and small little interactions that lead to good things, right? How do you capture that data? And so for me, I know that I've had to grow my competencies and develop my skills in a whole new way that's outside the clinic.
Right. Did you ever think that you would write an EPR bullet that captured the fact that you've recorded and distributed 75 podcast episodes, right? Like that's just not something that you imagined as you walked into this
Matter
position.
of fact, when I got on board and Dr. Jerry and the chaplain were on here, they were like, oh, you're going to be part of this podcast. I think I died a little. I was just like, no, I didn't want to be part of it, but it was definitely growing that skill.
Yeah.
Well, guys, I think we've reached that point in our podcast where we typically start thinking about our listening audience and tips that we would give them. I think we've already given them a lot during this episode in terms of...
We can consolidate them.
We can consolidate. Yeah. So, Dr. Jerry, let's start with you. Give us a tip, something that you would want someone new in a position to know, maybe a new leader, but maybe anyone who's kind of assuming a leadership role at any level.
Well, I'll make it even more general than that and talk about how to navigate transitions. But I'd say semper gumby, just be as flexible and go with the flow as you possibly can, because there's going to be a lot that hits you. A lot of things are going to go wrong as you're making this transition. A lot of things are not going to play out exactly how you thought when you're taking on this new leadership role, or you may not understand the whole situation before you're called to make a decision. So. Be as flexible as you can. Try to learn more so than direct, at least in those initial stages, and then rely on the people around you. I think every good leader tries to enter a new organization or a new role with a learning mentality rather than a directive mentality.
Love it.
Yeah, and for me, I would definitely recommend, keep tabs on your expectations, right? Expectation management is so huge, and then have patience, like you were mentioning. Let your folks show you what they do. Yeah. Really sit back, enjoy being the new guy or gal, right?
And recognizing what's urgent and what's not. Yeah. I mean, some stuff doesn't have to be acted upon right away.
Literally everything cannot be on fire. That's what I've learned.
You haven't worked with me for that long. I guess I would say speak well of everyone. I think when people come into roles, they're new. Especially if you're in a position where you're kind of a middle manager. If you've got some subordinates underneath you and you've got some folks who are above you, there's a tendency to want to please both. And sometimes, especially, I don't know if this is a problem for children of divorce specifically, but there's kind of this, maybe a tendency to say bad things about one parent so that you win credibility with the other parent, and vice versa, depending on your audience.
Yeah,
and
I had an NCO who did that against me to win the approval of his airmen. It was not fun.
Yeah.
And if you've ever been in that experience, and that's something that I experienced personally at the beginning of my career as a brand new CGO trying to establish some credibility in my clinic, I did what I could to build some credibility with some civilians who'd been there a long time in the clinic, as well as try to win over the heart of my flight commander at the time. And I don't think that I necessarily negotiated that well. And so I think it's important to speak well of everyone and not to play one entity off of another in order to win credibility or favor with other parts of the organization.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, guys, this feels like kind of a natural ending to our podcast, but maybe not such a natural ending to our relationship with Dr. Jerry.
Yeah.
Well, I've really enjoyed the past 2.5 years. It's been an absolute blast. And so thank you to you guys, and thank you to our listeners.
Wow.
I'll still be around, still writing the 5 Minutes to Thrive for the foreseeable future. So you'll still hear my voice in word for a little bit longer.
Absolutely. Well, and thanks from us. You know, it's been a great experience, and certainly need to give you credit for getting this podcast started and really developing our listening audience into what it is today. So thanks for your support, and we look forward to continuing to work with you in the future.
Yeah.
Yes, we're pulling from our gratitude episode.
Yeah,
we're pulling from our goodbye episode. This is great.
Some of the stuff we say on here makes sense. It's actually helpful. Yeah.
Well, thank you guys for listening to The Pillars, the podcast of the 363rd ISR Wing. Signing off for the very last time. I'm Dr. Jerry.
I'm Sergeant Joe.
And I'm Dr. Reed.
Have a great Air Force day.